F-16s locked on to her tiny plane, weapons armed, seconds from firing. Then one pilot froze. The insignia on her wing belonged to a call sign that was erased 12 years ago. What she did next stopped a strike that would have killed 70 innocent people. Stay till the end. You won't believe how this ends. Before you watch, full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The town of Wrens Hollow, Montana, did not appear on most maps. It had a single gas station, a diner that served the same meatloaf special every Thursday for 11 years, and a grass airstrip on the edge of town where a woman named Arden Cole taught teenagers and retirees how to fly. She was 41 years old. Her hands were calloused from engine work, her hair was more gray than not, and she wore the same brown leather jacket in every season, its collar worn smooth from years of wind. The people of Wrens Hollow called her Miss Arden, and most of them believed she had spent her younger years as a crop duster pilot somewhere in the Midwest before drifting north. Nobody asked too many questions. In a town like this, a person's past was their own business, and Arden had never given anyone a reason to think there was more to her story. There was.
12 years earlier, Arden Cole had been the finest fighter pilot in the United States Air Force. Her call sign was Red Falcon, and in the officer messes and ready rooms of half-dozen bases, people still spoke of her the way sailors speak of a ship that went down in a storm, with respect and a little bit of dread, because everyone had heard the ending and nobody was quite sure the story was over. She had flown more than 200 combat missions. She had never once put a round where it didn't belong. Commanders who did not trust anyone trusted her, and pilots half her age memorized her flight logs the way musicians memorize scales. And then, in the spring of 2012, over a stretch of scorched land in northern Syria, she had refused a direct order. Command had identified a compound as a terrorist stronghold. Multiple layers of intelligence had signed off on it. Arden was lead pilot on the strike package, locked onto target coordinates, weapons armed, seconds from release. And through her targeting pod, she saw a woman hanging laundry on a line strung between two low buildings. She saw children chasing something across a dirt courtyard, moving the unhurried way children move when they don't know the sky is about to open above them. She called it in. Negative, command. Civilians in the area. Request immediate target verification and mission abort. The answer came back hard and fast.
Strike must proceed. No delays, no second-guessing intelligence. Arden broke formation anyway. She banked away with a full payload still armed, radioed that she was aborting with civilians confirmed in the target zone, and flew home through a storm of furious commands ordering her to turn back and finish the job. For 11 minutes after she broke formation, the radio in her helmet had not stopped. Voices stacked on top of each other, some furious, some pleading, one so calm it was almost worse than the shouting. A voice reminding her, evenly, that a refusal like this would follow her for the rest of her career, that there was still time to turn around, that nobody would have to know she'd hesitated at all. She had throttled back, banked wide over open desert, and said nothing except the words she'd already said twice. Civilians confirmed. Mission aborted. Then she had switched the channel to silence and flown the rest of the way home listening only to the engine. She was right. The later investigation confirmed it. The compound had sheltered refugee families, not insurgents. 63 people were alive because a fighter pilot had trusted her own eyes over a colonel's certainty. 27 of them were children. She never saw a photograph of any of them, never learned a single name, and for years she told herself that not knowing was easier. It wasn't.
She thought about them anyway, in the particular unbidden way a person thinks about a stranger's life they changed without ever meeting them. A woman still hanging laundry somewhere. Children who had grown 7 inches since that morning and would never know how close the sky had come to opening above them. None of that saved her career. There was no court-martial because a trial would have meant testimony, and testimony would have meant questions nobody wanted asked in public. About the intelligence chain, about who had signed off on the coordinates, about how close the entire operation had come to becoming the kind of story that ends careers well above a single pilot's pay grade. It was simpler, cleaner, to make the story about insubordination instead of about a mistake nobody wanted to own. The meeting itself lasted 11 minutes. A colonel Arden had never spoken to before slid a folder across a metal table and told her, without quite meeting her eyes, that the Air Force valued her service
and that this decision reflected operational necessity, not judgment of her character. She remembered thinking, even then, how carefully rehearsed the sentence sounded, like it had been used in that exact room before and would be used again. She signed where she was told to sign. Nobody offered her coffee. Nobody shook her hand.
There was a quiet meeting in a windowless office, a discharge processed without ceremony, and a call sign, Red Falcon, formally retired and scrubbed from active records as though it had never existed. Her flight logs were sealed. Her name was quietly lifted from a mentorship program she'd built for junior pilots, replaced within the month, as though the program had simply always belonged to someone else. Within a year, if you asked most people at her old base who Red Falcon had been, you'd get a shrug, or a story with half the details wrong, or nothing at all. Arden did not fight it. She signed what she was told to sign, packed one duffel bag, and drove west until the mountains told her to stop. She rebuilt herself in Wren's Hollow one quiet year at a time. An instructor certificate earned the slow, ordinary way. A rented hangar with a leaking roof she patched herself the first winter. A 2-seat Cessna she found half-stripped in a barn outside Bozeman and restored panel by panel, rivet by rivet, until it flew as true as anything she'd ever piloted in uniform. The work suited her in a way she hadn't expected. There was something almost merciful about an engine. It didn't care about rank or history, only about whether you understood it well enough to keep it running.
She taught farm kids how to hold a crosswind landing on the county's short grass strips, and retired school teachers how to trust an engine they couldn't see, and once, memorably, a nervous insurance adjuster from Billings who cried with relief the first time he greased a landing on his own. She kept a small logbook of every student who soloed, and on quiet evenings she sometimes read through the names, the way another person might read old letters. She did not talk about the war. She did not talk about the Air Force at all. When a new student occasionally asked where she'd learned to fly like that, she would say only that she'd flown for a long time in a lot of different places, and something in the way she said it discouraged anyone from asking a second question. As far as Wren's Hollow was concerned, Miss Arden's story began the day she rented the hangar, and nothing before that mattered. She had built that silence carefully, brick by brick, the same way she'd rebuilt the Cessna, and for 12 years it had held. It was a Tuesday morning in October when the text arrived. Arden was in the hangar, elbow deep in a stuck carburetor linkage, when her phone buzzed against the workbench. She wiped her hands on a rag before picking it up, expecting a student canceling a lesson or the feed store confirming a delivery. The number was unlisted. The message had no greeting.
A misfired strike is about to happen. 70 civilians in the target zone. If you still know how to fly, do something about it. Below it, a string of coordinates. Below that, a timestamp, 91 minutes from the moment the message landed. Arden read it twice. Her first instinct, honed by 12 years of ordinary civilian life, was to assume it was a scam, a wrong number, a cruel prank aimed at someone else entirely. But the coordinates meant something to her. They sat inside the boundary of a restricted military training corridor she recognized from the sectional charts she still kept, out of habit, in a drawer she never opened. And 91 minutes was exactly the kind of window a person used when they wanted you to have just enough time to act and not 1 second to think. She stood very still in the hangar for almost a full minute, the rag still in her hand, the smell of aviation fuel and old grease thick in the air around her. 12 years of a life she had built with her own hands sat on one side of that minute. On the other side sat the thing she used to be before any of it, before the discharge, before the silence, before Wren's Hollow. Part of her wanted to call it in to someone, anyone, a local sheriff or a civilian aviation hotline, and let the message become someone else's problem.
But she knew, with the same certainty that had once told her a laundry line meant a family and not a fighting position, that nobody she could call in 90 minutes would move fast enough, or believe a text message from an unlisted number over 3 layers of confirmed intelligence. She had been on the other end of that certainty once. She knew exactly how long it took to break through it, and she knew she didn't have that long. She set the rag down. She didn't call her one regular student for that morning to cancel. There wasn't time to explain, and explaining wasn't something she knew how to do anyway. She left a note taped to the hangar door in case anyone came looking. 4 words in handwriting nobody would recognize as urgent. Back this afternoon. A.
Then she pulled her old flight jacket off its hook, the leather gone soft and dark at the cuffs from 30 years of hands, and by the time she reached her Cessna, she was no longer thinking like a flight instructor. She was running a pre-flight checklist her body remembered from a different life, faster than she'd run it in over a decade, her hands finding switches and gauges before her mind had fully caught up to what she was about to do.
At Malmstrom Air Force Base, the morning had started the way most mornings started, with a mission board, a coffee that had gone lukewarm an hour ago, and a young senior airman named Diego Rodriguez watching a radar screen that had shown nothing but scheduled traffic for 6 straight days. That changed at 0847. "Sir, we have a problem." Rodriguez's voice cracked slightly, the way voices do when routine breaks without warning. "Unknown aircraft, single engine, approaching from Sector 4. No transponder, no flight plan on file, no response on guard frequency." Colonel Frank Hayes, the watch commander, crossed the room in 4 steps and leaned over Rodriguez's shoulder. The blip was small, slow, and utterly unbothered by the airspace it was entering. "ETA to the restricted zone?" 12 minutes, sir." Hayes didn't hesitate. "Scramble the alert flight. Treat as potential hostile until proven otherwise." Within 4 minutes, 3 F-16s tore off the runway, afterburners lighting the gray Montana sky orange. Lead pilot was First Lieutenant Jake Harper, 28 years old, 2 years out of flight school, and still young enough to feel his pulse spike every time his canopy closed. His wingmen, Vasquez and Cho, formed up tight on either side as the formation climbed hard toward the intercept point. "Viper flight. Target is a twin—" Rodriguez corrected himself over the radio. "Correction, single-engine light aircraft, altitude 8,000, steady heading, steady speed, no evasive maneuvers." That last detail nagged at Harper as he closed the distance.
Most intruders, once they realized fighters were inbound, did something. Climbed, dove, turned, panicked. This aircraft did nothing. It flew the way a person walks when they already know exactly where they're going and aren't in a hurry to explain themselves to anyone in between. "Unidentified aircraft," Harper transmitted, his HUD flashing a lock indicator across the small silhouette ahead of him. "This is United States Air Force. You are entering restricted airspace during active military operations. Turn around immediately, or you will be fired upon." Nothing. No static, no stammered response, no change in heading. Harper's finger drifted toward the trigger guard on his control stick, the way 18 months of training had taught him it should. Standard protocol was simple: warning shots, then escalation if the aircraft continued to disregard commands. He began running the sequence in his head, the way he'd run it 100 times in the simulator, except this time his heart was doing something the simulator had never quite managed to replicate. He thought, briefly and uselessly, of every briefing that had ever tried to prepare him for a moment like this, the endless slides about rules of engagement, the case studies, the instructors who spoke about split-second decisions as though they were things you could rehearse your way into feeling calm about.
None of it had mentioned the particular silence in his own head right now. The way the checklist he was supposed to be running felt thin and far away compared to the small, stubborn plane holding its course 8,000 feet below him. He was 28 years old, 2 years removed from the academy, and nothing in those 2 years had told him what to do with a target that refused to look like a threat, no matter how many times protocol told him it was one. "Talk to me, Cho," he said, more to hear another voice than because he needed the update. "Anything on that aircraft's registration?" "Negative, lead. Tail number doesn't match anything in the civilian database. It's like it doesn't exist." Or like someone made sure it wouldn't, Harper thought, though he didn't say it aloud. Then he closed to visual range, and the protocol in his head stopped mattering. Through his canopy, in the strengthening morning light, he could see the aircraft clearly for the first time. A weathered 2-seat Cessna, its paint faded and scoured by years of weather, an aircraft that looked like it belonged in a museum next to a placard, rather than in the sky next to an F-16.
And on the starboard wing, worn nearly to a shadow, but still unmistakable to anyone who had studied the old case files during their final year at the academy, was an insignia, a falcon in a diving attack posture, wings swept back, painted in a red that had faded to the color of dried rust. Harper had seen that symbol exactly once before, in a mandatory ethics seminar his senior year, projected on a screen while an instructor spoke carefully around the edges of a story everyone in the room had already half heard through rumor. A pilot, the instructor had said, who made a choice during a classified operation,
The call sign was retired. That's all you need to know. Nobody in that room had believed it was all they needed to know. Stories like that don't stay contained. They leak sideways through years of hangar talk and late-night what-ifs until every young pilot has heard some version of it, half fact and half legend. "Control, this is Viper 1. Harper's voice was tighter than he wanted it to be. "Target aircraft is displaying what appears to be a red Falcon insignia. Historical call sign. Request immediate confirmation of pilot identity and mission status." The response came back clipped and certain. "Negative, Viper 1. No such call sign exists in the current active database. Red Falcon designation was retired over a decade ago. Maintain intercept protocol."
Prepare to engage if target continues to disregard commands. Harper's thumb hovered a half-inch from where duty told him it belonged. Every part of his training told him the plane below was either a threat or, at absolute best, an irrelevant civilian violation to be forced down and dealt with on the ground. But something else, something that didn't have a line item in any flight manual, told him that whatever was happening in that cockpit had nothing to do with him being right, and everything to do with him being fast enough to be wrong in a way that mattered. "Viper 2, Viper 3, he radioed. "Maintain formation. Hold fire until my command. Something's not adding up here." Below him, the Cessna banked, not away from the base, as any sensible violator fleeing an intercept would, but toward a different sector entirely. Harper watched the heading shift and felt his stomach drop as he understood what he was looking at on his own navigation display. The aircraft wasn't running from the fighters. It wasn't even flying toward the main runway complex. It was flying directly toward Sector 7, the unmanned aircraft operations facility, where, according to the mission board Harper had glanced at during his morning briefing, a strike package was being finalized for launch inside the hour. "Control, unknown aircraft is not targeting base facilities," Harper said, fighting to keep his voice level. "Repeat, aircraft appears to be heading towards Sector 7, UAV operations.
Recommend immediate caution on all scheduled unmanned missions pending further information." There was a pause on the other end of the radio that felt far longer than it actually was. "Copy, Viper 1. Stand by." Harper made his decision in the silence that followed. Instead of forcing the aircraft down, instead of doing the thing his training screamed at him to do, he eased his throttle back and slid into a shadowing position off the Cessna's wing, close enough to keep visual, far enough to give whoever was flying it room to breathe. Whoever this is, he thought, watching the small plane hold its steady, deliberate course, isn't running from anything. She's running towards something, and she doesn't look like she's planning to stop. Inside the Cessna, Arden's hands moved across an old radio panel with a fluency that had nothing to do with the 12 years she'd spent flying banner tow routes over county fairs and teaching stall recovery to nervous 16-year-olds. Muscle memory doesn't erode the way conscious memory does. It sits quietly under everything else, waiting. She reached for a frequency she hadn't touched since a night over the Mediterranean more than a decade ago, a channel reserved for a code so old and so restricted that most people who'd once been cleared to use it had either retired, been reassigned, or forgotten it existed. Priority Alpha.
A signal built for exactly one purpose: to cut through every layer of bureaucracy and hierarchy standing between a warning and the people who needed to hear it, when there was no time left to go through channels. She keyed the mic and transmitted it. In the Drone Operations Center at Malmstrom, General Marcus Wexler was reviewing the morning's mission package: target coordinates, imagery analysis, a launch window closing in under 20 minutes, when the emergency panel beside his desk erupted with a tone he hadn't heard since he was a much younger officer standing in a briefing room in the Middle East. He knew that tone. He had heard it exactly once before in his career, on a night when a single fighter pilot's warning had kept his convoy from driving straight into an ambush that would have killed everyone in it. 43 men had gone home to their families because of that transmission. Wexler had never forgotten the call sign attached to it. His face went pale in a way the younger officers around him had never seen. "All UAV operations halt immediately," he said, and something in his voice made the entire control room stop what it was doing without asking why. "Ground all unmanned aircraft until further notice. I want reconnaissance teams verifying every target coordinate on that mission board before a single system goes hot. Now." Major Elena Santos looked up from her console, confused.
"Sir, that mission's been through 3 levels of intelligence review. We don't have grounds to. We do now," Wexler said. "Move."
28 minutes later, the confirmation came back from a ground team that had scrambled a reconnaissance flyover on Wexler's direct order, cutting through channels that normally took days to clear. "Sir." Santos's voice had lost its earlier confidence entirely. "We have confirmation. Target coordinates contain approximately 70 civilians, refugees, sir, including at least 30 children. They're sheltering in structures marked for the strike. It's not a hostile compound. It's a displacement camp. The imagery analyst flagged movement patterns consistent with a strike zone almost 3 days ago, sir. It got overwritten at the review stage. Nobody escalated it." Wexler closed his eyes for a long moment. When he opened them, he looked 10 years older than he had at the start of the briefing. He had built his entire career on trusting the process, the layered reviews, the redundant sign-offs, the idea that no single person's error could ever slip all the way through to a launch order. He had believed that, genuinely, right up until the moment a woman he hadn't spoken to in 12 years had proven in 91 minutes exactly how wrong he'd been. "Aboard all strike packages tied to that sector," he said quietly. "Reclassify the zone as protected civilian territory. Effective immediately."